Welcome back to Train Signal. This is Elias Kinaser, and you're watching Creating Application Packages with Server AppV. So this lesson is going to be a cool one. I'm going to give you guys a break from the long waits of things to finish and clones and all of that. And we are going to break away and talk about this really cool lesson. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So this is where we're incorporating application virtualization technologies into our private cloud. This is where this entire circle between desktop virtualization and consumerization and cloud, they kind of come together at this meeting point, if I can call it. Now, for those of you that are familiar with application virtualization, those of you that have been following along with all of my courses and Citrix XenApp and all of that, you're probably familiar with that. For those of you that aren't, well, we're going to talk a little bit about what application virtualization is and why are we going to use it in a private cloud scenario. We're also going to talk about some of the differences between server AppV and regular AppV because there are differences that you should be aware of. But first, let's define what server AppV is, right? So what is it? Well, server AppV is a form of application virtualization. And if you don't know what app virtualization is, it's a virtualization solution that can deliver applications that are really never installed. So you're kind of layering the application on top of the operating system. It uses all of the hooks that it needs into the operating system. So it'll hook into the DLLs and take advantage of the entire operating system. It actually cannot run without that operating system. So any application virtualization package, you can't package a Windows application and then run it on Mac or Linux. It requires that Windows infrastructure, that registry, those DLLs, everything in order for it to function. With one difference, one minor difference, well, major, but we're going to call it minor. And that's the fact that it's not installing on the operating system. So it's not modifying any of these files. It's not modifying the registry. It's not modifying the DLLs. It's not copying any files. So app virtualization is essentially a package that wraps into that package all of the DLLs, all of the registry, all of the settings, everything that that application requires is kind of put into that bubble, and then that bubble is layered on top of the operating system and it's run on it. Now, when you look at it from a task manager perspective, it's consuming memory, it's consuming CPU, but it's just not affecting that underlying operating system. What that gives us is a clean operating system, no application conflicts considering nothing is really being installed, but it also poses challenges because there's application interoperability challenges. There's some applications that don't virtualize well, some applications don't virtualize at all. So when you're dealing with application virtualization, there's one thing you need to keep in mind. There is nothing that I can show you in this lesson or in an entire course around app virtualization that will make you know everything that you need to know, and that you're going to virtualize everything following the exact steps that I'm showing you. You're going to very quickly notice that app virtualization is an art. You're going to have to sometimes learn the applications better than the application developers know them and understand the tweaks and what registry keys need what types of permissions. And you'll have to tweak that application in order to make it work virtualized. And sometimes when you look at the effort that it is required to virtualize that application is just not worth it. You just move on. So not everything is going to be virtualized, but application virtualization, if you can get away with it, if you can get your apps to be virtualized completely, well, it'll save you a lot of headaches. It's very clean, it's very easy, and it's going to fit perfectly within our private cloud scenario. Now, there are a couple different solution providers out there, software makers that have application virtualization solutions. Well, Microsoft namely has AppV. Now AppV started off via an acquisition that Microsoft made many years ago from a company called Softricity, and the product was actually called SoftGrid. SoftGrid was quickly renamed into AppV, and for the longest time AppV was a desktop virtualization or an application virtualization solution for desktop applications, hence why you see me here in parentheses I have desktop applications. Microsoft Server AppV is relatively a newbie on the scene that is dedicated for server applications. And you're going to find very quickly as we move on with these slides that Microsoft regular AppV and Microsoft Server AppV, there's some differences. So you can't use the same applications from Server AppV on regular AppV and vice versa. Now, another leader in application virtualization is Citrix XenApp. Citrix XenApp has actually two types of application virtualizations. You have the regular just XenApp terminal server applications that you publish. Well, those are application virtualization, right? When you're running them from your client, you're not really installing anything, you're layering it. You just have those screenshot updates. And then there's the streaming profiler that is very similar to the AppV technology where you're packaging things and then you're running them on the OS without actually installing them. VMware in turn also has made acquisitions in this space many years ago, and their flagship product is ThinApp, very powerful application virtualization product as well. Now, let me explain this to you in greater detail, but let's bring up a whiteboard. Let me explain to you what I mean by, well, you're layering it on top, you're not installing it. Maybe a visual will help. And then let me show you where it fits into private cloud. All right, so traditionally, let's consider this to be our regular operating system, right? So consider this, I don't know, Windows. Let's call this Windows. Traditionally, you would take something like Office and you would install it on here. So this would be part of your operating system. You would take something like Adobe and you would also install it on here. You would take something like WinZip and you would install it in here as well. So all of these together constitute your hard drive, that C drive or D drive or whatever it's called, right, in your environment. Everything is installed on here. Everything is modified. All of these hooks into this operating system are modified. DLL files are changed. Your registry is changed, etc. Right? So this is why every 6 months, us administrators tend to kind of wipe out this entire disk and install it cleanly, because the registry starts to get tired. It starts to get filled with all of these values and all these things that it has to run through. And the operating system, the computer, is just not running as fast as it does when you first install the operating system fresh. And there's a reason for that. It's because of all the junk that we put on top of it. It's because of all the applications that are inside of it. Well, if there was a way for us to maintain a clean operating system with a clean registry and not any files that get installed on here, so that every time we boot our computer, we get that fresh, fast operating system with all of our apps on it. Well, that's what application virtualization tries to accomplish. What application virtualization gives you is that layer of operating system that does not get changed. No modifications whatsoever at this layer. Now, when you want to install an application, that application gets layered on top. So imagine if this was Office, right? So it gets layered on top. Those are your hooks into, it opens the registry when it needs to. It makes the modifications, but nothing actually sticks, right? It uses the DLL files. It uses everything in that operating system without actually making any changes into the operating system. And then similarly, if you're installing, for instance, Adobe, well, it sits into this application bubble again, and it does the entire same thing all over again. Again, it hooks into the OS, but it does not change the OS, which is the beauty of this. Operating system stays clean, machine performs perfectly. How does this help us in a private cloud scenario? Let's bring up a clean whiteboard here. Well, in a private cloud, the whole idea is we're creating these VMs, right? And what we want to do is be able to deploy the VM, and at the time of deployment, we are giving it what? That guest operating system profile, right? We're giving it the hardware profile. We're giving it all sorts of profiles that at provisioning time are coming together to create essentially the perfect virtual machine. So if this virtual machine was to be, your SQL virtual machine, at time of provisioning, you're giving it the right hardware profile for SQL, the right guest operating system profile for SQL, even a SQL profile so it can configure SQL Server. It's going to add all the right roles and features, and everything's going to come together from this generic virtual machine template that you're deploying and create the ideal environment for SQL. Well, what if during provisioning also we can deliver the right types of applications to this virtual machine? And we can do that without actually installing the applications on this virtual machine. So at time of provisioning, you're provisioning everything that you need, including the server applications. Now keep in mind, this is one thing to note. Server AppV is going to deliver server class applications as opposed to regular AppV that's delivering desktop class applications. So I'm talking about things like SQL. I'm talking about .NET applications, things like Citrix XenApp servers. So you are delivering server style or server class applications to this VM. So it's an entire mind shift And again, you're doing it without actually disturbing that actual operating system that resides on this virtual machine or physical machine or whatever it is. So again, at time of provisioning, everything is coming together to create that ideal virtual machine with the right profiles for everything that you need. So that's where the power of the actual server AppV technology comes into play. And this is going to get clearer again as we start to deliver services and service templates a little later on. So again, as you're delivering that service, which could be, an N tier, right? So an N tier consists of essentially your, I don't know, your web server and your middleware server in here, and then for instance your database server. This is a typical N tier deployment. So maybe for your web server you're delivering that virtual machine. You're also applying the guest OS, the hardware, the app virtualization application that is required for this web server, doing the same thing for the middleware, and you're doing the same thing for the database. So again, this will get clearer as we start to talk about services, but keep that in mind. So things that you need to know about server AppV. AppV and server AppV are not the same, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier. The applications that you're going to sequence to run on regular AppV are going to be applications that typically run on desktops. Those applications cannot be used to run on the server if you've sequenced them with regular AppV. So the sequencer is different. The application packages themselves are different. They have different settings. They contain more settings. So they're not interused, right? So it's not interusable, and that's a word that I've created. Hopefully it exists. Now, the other thing to note, this is the main difference, is that for servers, there's something called roles and features. That's where you install your IIS, you install your Hyper-V. Those are roles.NET. Those are roles and features that don't necessarily exist on a desktop. Hence, server AppV is aware that it needs to take into account roles and features, whereas regular AppV completely disregards those because they don't exist. They are not important. Also, server AppV is dealing with server class applications, so it will take into account additional configurations, additional registries, whereas regular AppV does not. So there's a lot of difference between AppV and server AppV, and it's important for you to always remember that. In order for us to be able to work with a sequencer, and anytime you're packaging applications, and this applies whether it's AppV or server AppV, you need something called a reference machine. A reference machine is a clean install of an operating system. If you were using regular AppV, then you would install all the operating system, hotfixes, patches, service packs, whatever you need before you start sequencing. In the case of server AppV, then the reference machine is going to be installed. You're going to apply whatever you need to apply to it, but you're also going to enable all the roles and features that the application that you need to sequence requires. So all of the prerequisites that the application needs have to be put into place. That reference machine is called a clean install. Every time you sequence an application, you have to do it on a clean install, which is why using virtual machines are very important because of their snapshot capabilities. So what you want to do is, let's say you're sequencing .NET application. You sequence that .NET application. As soon as you're done and your package is the way you want it, you revert back to that clean gold standard VM, and then you run that sequencer again for a different type of application. You can't do the same machine for different types of applications continuously, and this was very challenging before virtual machines came along. We were using Ghost. Every time we want a clean machine, we would reghost. With snapshots, you can essentially go back within a matter of seconds. Now, obviously, antivirus is also not going to be recommended for reference machines. This is going to be a challenge for those environments that have, stringent security requirements. If you must install the antivirus at the time of sequencing, it has to be disabled. I would highly recommend that your reference machine does not have antivirus, so it doesn't interfere with the sequencer and it doesn't introduce any challenges for you. Now, in order for you to follow along with what I'm about to do on this lesson or in this lesson, you'll need to get and prepare a few things. So the first thing I want you to do is download PetShop 4.0. This is the .NET framework or the .NET application that we're going to be using during this lesson. This is what we're going to be packaging. Everything is going to revolve essentially around this application in this lesson. I've given you the link to where you can download that. One of the things that we also need to do is disable user account control, otherwise known as UAC. And I've given you MMC console essentially that would allow you to do that, and I'll show you how to do it. It's secpol.msc. We want to make sure that web server is installed, so IIS needs to be installed. The web server management tools need to be installed. Those are a prerequisite, or they'll get installed as part of the IIS installation. Web Deploy 2.0 should be installed, and I'll show you where to get that from your VMM library. It should be there automatically, and we would need .NET Framework 2.0 to be installed as well, and that's also available on Windows Server 2012. Let's go ahead and switch over to our reference server and start the installation and sequencing of this really cool application. Alright, so we're on the reference server. Again, it's called reference server. It's essentially a very clean install, just out of the box, install Windows Server 2012. I didn't install any kind of service packs or hotfixes or anything like that. I have disabled Internet Explorer Enhanced Security. If you don't know where to do that, you can just come up here into Server Manager, come down here to where it says Local Server, and it is right here. I've shown you this a few times now during this course, but you can turn it off here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to disable user access control. Right now, to do that, let's come up to the start menu, and once you're at the start menu, just start typing secpol.msc. Once that comes up, let's go ahead and drill down into local policies, security options, and all the way towards the end here. Let's go ahead and maximize this. You'll find that you have a number of user account control policies in place. You can disable a lot of them. The one that I'm kind of really interested in is this one, which is detecting the applications. I'm just going to select this and disable it. If in your environment or for the application that you're going to sequence, you'll need to disable anything else, you can choose to do so. For now, this is going to be good enough for us, but you can again disable more of them. Once you've done that, we're going to go ahead and exit out of here, and let's bring up Server Manager again. Now, my application is going to require the installation of an IIS server. I need a bunch of things that need to be installed. So in order to prepare the server before I run my sequencer and before I install my sequencer, before any of that, let's go ahead and prepare my server for what exactly I want it to be. Now, I've taken a snapshot already of the server. So after I'm done, I can revert back to my gold, which will undo all of the things that we've just done to this point. So if you click on Add Roles here, we click on Next. Let's make this a little higher here. Next again. We're going to apply this to the local server. I'm not installing any roles at this point. Well, actually I am. I need the web server role. So let's go ahead and select web server, and you'll find that automatically it wants to install the tools, the management tools. So I'm okay with that. We're going to select that. We're going to click on Next. Now, I told you earlier that I need the .NET Framework 2.0, so if you expand .NET Framework 3.5 features here, you'll find that if you install 3.5, it also includes 2.0 and 3.0, so that's exactly what I need. We're going to click on Next. Next one more time. These are the features of the web server, the IIS server, that you could enable or disable. Depending on what you're trying to do, you might want to enable or disable some of these features. I'm going to leave them a default set for right now. Click on Next. I'm basically getting a warning here that some of the source files might be missing. It's going to try to get them from Windows Update. If not, it's going to prompt me for the Windows Server 2012 ISO so that it continue the installation of these features and roles that I'm asking it to do here. Once you're ready, we're going to go ahead and click on Install. All right, once this is complete, we're just going to go ahead and click on Close to exit out of here. Take a look at the notification here. That's great. My installation was successful. There doesn't seem to be a reboot that is required. So I'm going to get out of Server Manager. Now, recall there was one more requirement that we needed for this, which was Web Deploy. And I told you that you can get that from your VMM library share. Now, to do that, from within the reference server, what I'm going to do is we're just going to open up my computer here. And we are going to whack VMM01 enter. Now remember, this is a share, so I can access it remotely. So in my VMM library share here, under Application Frameworks, you'll find your Web Deploy, and again 64-bit or 32-bit. For me, it's going to be 64-bit. and I'm just going to simply double click on it. I'm going to accept all the defaults. Typical. And finish. All right, so I have right now fulfilled all of the prerequisites, all of the requirements for this application that I need to sequence. So now I have downloaded that application and I've placed it into this following directory, the downloads directory. It's the Microsoft.NET Pet Shop 4.0. But before we obviously install this, we have to run or install the Microsoft Server AppV sequencer, which you will find on the Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012 Service Pack 1 ISO. What I've done is I have already on that location, on that actual CD, if you browse the CD itself, you'll find that you have a directory called SAV for Server AppV. In there you have again 32-bit or 64-bit, and there is my sequencer. So I'm gonna just essentially run that. You also have the agent that typically gets installed on the actual server that's gonna run these applications. For now we don't need it, so all I need to do is run the SEQ for sequencer setup. I'm gonna click next. There's really no rocket science here. We're gonna accept all of the defaults. We don't want to join the customer experience. This is the default location where it gets installed. And finish. The installation of Server AppV is truly very, very straightforward. Once this is completed, we're going to exit out of this window as we don't need it anymore. And are you guys ready? We need to start sequencing this really cool app. So let's go to the Start menu. And we have the Microsoft Server Application Virtualization here. We're going to click on it. That's going to launch a very basic window. Again, you're either modifying a package here or you're creating a package. This is our first attempt at this, so we're going to actually click to create the new package. Okay, so the first thing you're going to be presented with when you run the sequencer is going to go through and browse your computer and make sure that everything is okay, if there's anything missing, if there's anything that need to be added before that package can actually run. And it's found a few things for my environment, depending on what I've installed, that it's saying, whoops, be careful, those components are missing. You probably want to address this before moving on. Now, these components happen to be components of SQL Server. So there's some decisions that you need to make here. So before you actually remedy this, and remedying this is very easy, you simply double click on it. You'll find what the feature is that is missing, and then just do a quick Google search. For instance, you can do a Google search on the DAC framework and you can download that. Actually, all three of these you'll probably download from the same web page, depending on the SQL Server version that you're going to be using. So I've downloaded these requirements. I'm going to go ahead and install them. I'm not going to waste the recording time here showing you how to install. Installation is very straightforward, very basic. So at this point, if you're seeing the same thing, I want you to pause the video, go through, remedy this, and then play the video back up again so that we can continue. All right, let's hit refresh now. And voila. Now, in your case, you might need to restart your computer in order for these to go away. So if you try to hit refresh and they don't kind of refresh, cancel out, reboot the computer, run the sequencer again, and you'll find that they've gone away. Sometimes, depending on the components, depending on what you've done, you might need to restart the entire computer. You might also be able to get away with just exiting completely out of the sequencer and just running it again. That might refresh things up. When you get to a point where there are no issues, no prerequisites, nothing, and you're ready to create the package, we're going to click on Next to continue. And we are going to essentially here, what are we trying to do? So the sequencer has a few different ways of monitoring what you're doing to this computer. One of the ways, which is what we're going to use, is we're going to select the actual application executable. We're going to run that. Now, as we're running it, the sequencer is going to monitor what changes it's making to the DLL, what changes it's making to the registry, any files we copy onto the operating system. Essentially, anything we do to this server While we're running the sequencer in the background, it's going to collect that information and then put all of that into the package. It's going to assume that all of these steps are required for the application to function. So if you do a regular copy and paste of a file, it's going to monitor that, it's going to capture that, and then it's going to collect all of these information. Now, as you are well aware of, some applications, like if you have some homegrown applications that developers have written, don't have an executable. They don't have an automated setup program that can run and do all of these things for you. You might have to perform all of these things manually, and these things can include essentially copying and pasting of files, modifying registry keys, installing and registering DLLs, all of that, right? So in that case, there is really nothing to run. There's no MSI. You would choose this particular option, and then you would go through the wizard, copying the files in the right locations, making the modifications, again, doing everything that is needed for the application to run properly while the sequencer is monitoring your actions. So that's this second option here. And then your third option is to create packages from applications that are on a remote server. Again, if there's a application that is installed or that needs to be installed or it's already installed on a remote server, then you can try to capture that application by running it, and while the sequencer is in the background, it's going to try to capture all of the open files or anything it's touching in order to create that package. This one becomes a little more complicated, whereas these two are a little easier to deal with. So once you're ready, we're going to click on Browse here to locate the application that we're trying to sequence, and mine is in my Downloads directory here. I'm just going to select it, click on Open. We're going to click on Next here. What do you want to call this application? For simplicity, we're just going to call this Pet Shop. Now, this is very, very important. The location, the path to this application is Q Pet Shop. So in a little bit, we're going to click on Next, and it's going to launch the application. So the application is going to launch, and it's going to install as if you were installing it without the sequencer. Now, when it's going through its installation, it's going to want the default path where it needs to install the application. What I want you to do at that point is paste this particular path as opposed to what you have there by default. So do a copy of this. This is important because this application package, when you're going to run it later on as a virtualized application, needs kind of this Q drive, which is, call it the Switzerland of drives, which is not tied to a particular server, right? It's like a network drive that it creates automatically and runs it from. So make sure you're copying this and click on Next. And at this point, it's going to go through the process of launching the setup of the Pet Shop application. See, and you'll see down here that tip before it went away, before I scared it away, which basically says to make sure to replace the Q drive with whatever default path is going to show up here. So I'm going to click on Next. This is the regular installation of this application. We're going to click on Next here. We're going to accept the license agreement. Again, we're just going to accept all of these. We're going to do a source code only installation. And this is where you would need to make that change. So in my case, I'm just going to remove all of this, and I'm going to paste that path that I showed you from earlier on. Then we're going to click on Next. When you're ready, again, click on Next, and it's going to go through. And at this point, the sequencer is monitoring everything that this setup is doing to the underlying operating system. Now, part of what it does, it opens up Windows Explorer in the background here, or Internet Explorer with this README file. I don't need this, so I'm just going to go ahead and close it. I'm also done with the setup wizard for the application, so I'm going to go ahead and close that as well. Now, you get to this point. The sequencer is not done yet. The sequencer is still monitoring everything that you're doing in the background on this server at this point. A lot of servers or a lot of applications, after you've installed them, you need to do some post-installation configuration. And those post-installation configurations can be a number of things. They can be, for instance, running of scripts, as we're going to do. They could be tweaking some registry keys. They can be copying files. They can be a whole slew of things that are required in order for you to make this application function properly, where the sequencer needs to also understand what you're doing, monitor them, capture them, so that it can bubble them up and package them. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to open an elevated command prompt so I can run some scripts. So I'm going to come down here to the Start menu, and I'm going to type CMD for command prompt. And once that pops up, I'm going to right-click on it. Down here, you'll find that you can run this as administrator, which is my elevated command prompt here. Then I want to switch to that Q drive that we just created. So I'm just going to do Q. And in Q, if you do a quick dir here, you'll find that I have my Pet Shop directory that we created. So I'm going to do CD pet shop. And again, if I do a quick dir here, you'll find that there's a lot of applications, there are a lot of scripts. One of the scripts that I want to run is actually called build.bat. Now, once I execute this, it's going to go through and it's going to do its thing. It's going to do a whole slew of post-installation configurations to this application. When it's done, it's going to say press any key to continue. I'm going to go ahead and press any key to continue. And one more script that I want to run is called encrypt webconfig.bat. And we're going to run that as well. That takes a few seconds, doesn't take long at all. Once it's done, we're going to click on any key to continue. I am done with the command prompt, so I'm just going to click on exit to get out of here. Now, I also have to make some modifications to my web server. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the Start menu again. Keep in mind that Sequencer is still monitoring everything that I'm doing. So I'm going to go to Internet Information Services here. Once that comes up, we're going to go through and go to my local server. I'm going to say no to that for right now. We're going to expand my local server here, and under Sites, we're going to right-click on it, and we're going to click on Add Website. For the site name, we're just going to do Pet Shop here. And for the path, what I want to do is we're going to select, let's go through and actually select this. We're going to go through the Q drive, and under the Q drive, we're going to select Pet Shop. And under Pet Shop, what we are going to do is select the directory called Web. We're going to change the port that it's listening on here to port 8080. And that's it. We're going to go ahead and click on OK. We have configured our web server to our liking. Once you're done, I'm done with this application. There's really nothing that I need to do to, from a post-installation perspective, I don't need to run anything. I'm done. So I'm going to go ahead and click on, and by the way, this run, you might want to run some other applications that, for instance, need to make modifications to this particular one. Or it might have additional installers or executables that also need to run. So everything I've done was essentially batch files and scripts. But if there was additional executables that this application requires, then you can use this particular button here. Now I'm finished with this, so I'm going to select the checkbox and we're going to click on Next. The sequencer is going to go through and it's going to collect everything that I've done to this server, all of the changes that I've done, and it's going to create my package. Alright, so the final step here with the sequencer is that it gives you the option of running the application to make sure that everything's okay once it's done. Now, this would be ideal in the desktop application virtualization world. For instance, if you're running Adobe Acrobat Reader. What this allows you to do is configure any first use settings. So if the application on first use, on first launch, will prompt you with a license agreement that you have to click on Agree, well, and you don't want your users to see that, well, you can come here, for instance, and launch the application for the first time, click on Agree, and that won't come up again. So in this case, you can run all of these applications and make any final tweaks to the first use application. If everything is to your liking, then you can click on Next. Again, that was the last step. If there was anything that needed to be monitored, captured from whatever final settings and tweaks you've done, it would capture that. We've successfully created this package, so what I'm going to do now is close the sequencer, and you'll find that this is your package at this point. So, you have your properties here, any properties for that, anything that you've changed, the change history is shown up here, any of the files will show up here. So for example, this is the directory, these are all the files underneath it. Anything from a virtual registry perspective, so this is all the changes that it's made to the registry. Again, you can go through, you can take a look at them, you can add, you can change them. Anything that you want to do post package to this application, you can come in here and make those final changes, make those final tweaks. If after you've tried to run this, again, there's changes that you need to make, again, you can open the package and make those changes. When you are ready, This is not your package yet. When you are ready, you're going to click on File, and you're going to do a Save As. When you do that Save As, I'm going to put it on the desktop just because we want to make it easy. And in there, I'm going to put it into a directory, and we're going to call that directory for now V1, and I'll tell you in a second why we're going to call it V1. So once that's there, we're going to select it, and let's go ahead and save. All right, so I'm done. My package is now ready. Let's exit out of here as well. If you go into that V1 here, you'll find that all of the files that are required to run this particular application virtualized are now within this nice V1 directory. You have your OSD files, you have this is your OSD file, your configuration files, you have your manifesto for everything that's been done. So you have your application that is now ready to run. Well, at this point, we want to make sure that we're copying or saving this package in our VMM library in a place where, is easily accessible to us, right? So what I want to do at this point is I want to copy this package to my VMM directory. So let's go to VMM01 here. Under there, we have our two shares that we've been working with. Let's go under the default share here. And down here, I want to actually create a location where I can save all my AppV files. So I'm just going to right click. We're going to click down to New. And under Folder, let's go ahead and call this AppV. And under AppV, well, let's create another folder, and let's call that one Pet Shop 4. Or let's call it just Pet Shop, since we've been dealing with just Pet Shop all this time. Now, under Pet Shop, V stands for version 1. Very simple. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to right click, we're going to do a copy, and let's do a paste. And all of these files are now in the actual VMM library. Let's go through the management console, the VMM management console, and verify that those are there. Okay, so I have the library node expanded here. This is my share. So what I want to do is right click on it, and let's give it a quick refresh. Now the refresh will take a few seconds depending on how fast yours are. And here it is. It just popped up with AppV. If you double click on it, there's your Pet Shop, and under there you have V1. Under there you have that application. Now let's take a look at the properties of this file. So I'm just going to right click on it, and let's drag down here to where it says properties. I am going to give this a better name than V1. So we're going to call this Pet Shop. And then under the release, we're going to call this 1.0 for version 1.0. For a family, this is essentially again, what grouping is this under? I'm just going to give it Pet Shop. It doesn't really make much of a difference here. So this is exactly how I want my properties file to look. We're going to click on OK. And there you go. It renames that application and gives it a more friendly name for us to be able to identify it by. Okay, so now that we have the AppV package here, I also want to copy some of the SQL scripts that Pet Shop Pro needs, or that we're going to need later on as we're creating the SQL profile. These are things that we're not going to use in this lesson, but I just want to put them in the right place for later use. So let's go back to our reference server, and before we destroy it, and again, we're doing this because typically a reference server, after you're done with it, you're going to want to take it back using the snapshot to its gold image, and as a result, you're going to lose that opportunity. So I want to make sure we're finishing up everything that we need from that reference server before we move on. So let's go back to that for a second. Now on here, let's go to computer, and on that Q drive we have Pet Shop, and under Pet Shop you'll find that you have database scripts. Under database scripts, we're going to copy the contents of the SQL database, or the SQL directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the SQL directory here, and then we're going to browse over to our VMM share one more time, VMM library shares, VMM01. Under there we have the application framework, and this is where we want to put these files essentially in. Under there we're going to create a directory which we are going to name SQL _T scripts, and under that directory we're going to paste essentially those scripts that we copied from the reference server, and then we're going to rename this directory to Pet Shop And let's call it petshop 4 just so we know the version of these SQL scripts, and then we'll do sql db.cr. Voila. Now we are done. We've copied all of the necessary assets that we need for this application. Let's go back and refresh our library server one more time. So if I come down here and I hit refresh one more time, let's take a look. There you are. There they are. And voila. So we're going to use those at a later time, but I wanted to make sure that everything that we needed, all of our assets, were in the library so that they're organized, and as we need them, we can come grab them from the library and we don't have to worry about where they're at, what happened to that reference server, nothing. I want to complete the entire task, all of the requirements, before we move on. All right, now the final step in this lesson, so that we have a completed application that we can use later on, is to create a profile for this application. So we have the application in the library, we've sequenced it, we've packaged it, we have the SQL stuff for it, we've got everything that we need. But at this point, it's just an asset. There is really nothing that we can use. There is no bridge. There's nothing that we can use to connect it with VMM in our private cloud. And this is where the application profile comes into play. We're going to create an application, consider this a wrapper for this application that we can then later on use when we're creating services to essentially insert this application as part of the creation of those services. So in order to do that, what I want to do at this point is we're going to click on Create up here, and we are going to click on Create Application Profile. And for the application name, for the application profile name, I'm just going to do Pet Shop for now. And let's do that. You can give it a description if you choose to do so. And then let's click on Application Configuration. The first thing that you want to determine is what operating systems do you want to allow this application to run on? What operating system will it be compatible with? Now, we sequenced this on Windows Server 2012. So obviously Windows Server 2012 Standard will be fine, or any other Windows Server 2012 will be fine. The rule of thumb, however, if you're trying to sequence this application and you know that it's going to run on more than one type of operating system, then make sure that the reference server that you're using to sequence that application has the lowest common denominator. So it should be using the lowest operating system type that you're going to be using. So for example, if you know that this is going to run on Windows 2008 64-bit, Windows 2008 R2, and Windows Server 2012, then make sure the reference server and the sequencer is running on a Windows 2008 64-bit. That is the lowest common denominator, the lowest common operating system among those. So you can come in, and I can probably select all of them and it'll work just fine. But just to keep things simple for now, I'm just going to select Windows Server 2012 Standard, since this is what we've created the package on. I'm also going to click on Add, and I'm going to select Virtual Application, considering that is the application that we're trying to create this profile for. Application name, again, you'll find that we're putting in a name a lot. This could be streamlined so that we're not doing this a lot. I'm going to put 4 next to it just so we can identify the version. And then from the browse here, we have the option of selecting what are we trying to copy in here, and you'll find that because it's a virtual application, because it's in my library, it automatically gives me the option of selecting it. So I'm going to click on OK. Now, if there was any other scripts, anything else that we would need to do as part of this application virtualization profile that we're trying to create, you can obviously select the scripts here and click on Add to add those. Anything else that you would want to configure this as, you can add that to the application profile. Now, up here in general, we skipped over again this particular drop down here, which is compatibility. Right now, the compatibility is general. If you wanted to make it a little more specific so that this is a SQL Server application host, well, then you can make that compatibility to match that. Or if this was an application, web application host, then again, you can specify that. For my purposes, I'm just going to leave this at general at this point. And again, you have the type. It's an application profile at this point. So once you're comfortable with it, you're ready, we are going to go ahead and click on OK. And now if we scroll up here to the application profiles, you'll find that voila, there it is. If we right click on it, now you have the option of going back in and modifying any of those settings if you need to do so. So at this point, this is all I wanted to show you in this lesson, is how to go through and get everything ready to create applications using Server AppV. So what did we cover? So we start off by talking about, well, what is application virtualization? We defined it, talked a little bit about the players, talked about what the reference server should look like, what are some of the prerequisites that you're going to need, the difference between server AppV and regular AppV. And then in the GUI process, we used our reference server, we installed the sequencer, we installed all the prerequisites, the features, the roles, all the prerequisites for the application. We installed the sequencer, we actually ran through the application installation and packaged it. We implemented or we copied the SQL scripts and the actual applications into the VMM library, and we also then created an application profile for this virtualized application. Finally, I hope this lesson was very informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.